in football. It hasn't been played enough, obviously. All right. Reel it in, Joe. Damn it. This is a professional production.
Hey, man, you're singing Mo Bamba to run it off. I mean, at least start it off that way. Come on.
Yeah. Welcome all to the Tortillas and Takes podcast. This is the voice of the People's Champ, and you can see me because this is our second recorded video. Still weird, still don't like it, still now very self-conscious about everything I have behind me. Used to not care, now it's on the forefront of my mind every time I log in. But we are here at the end of bye week, thank God, because for some reason, Texas Tech fans are stoked about playing football. And we have brought on, well, first, you know you love him. It is TTU Presidente. It's the man himself, Joe Lopez. Joe, how are we doing?
Jeremy,
are we bored yet?
Doing fantastic. Doing great. Just got home from bowling with a coworker, and it went way better than expected. So,
yeah, bowling?
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. I will never go bowling because them shoes, I just cannot do the shoes. I don't want to put my feet in like a pair of shoes that have been sitting there since the 80s. And I don't know how many people, all they do is spray it out. That doesn't clean it. You can't lie to me.
I have my own.
Okay. Well, I didn't realize. I did not realize I was in the presence of greatness.
I have the same sentiment about those shoes.
There we go. That's a man prepared, people. Obviously not me, and obviously not Albert, who would rather skip out and not do this podcast at all. He tried to quit, but we're just giving him a one day off. But speaking of greatness, speaking of people that you want on your podcast, that you want to talk to because they're fun to talk to and they know what they're talking about, unlike most people on Twitter, we have brought on Shehan Jeyarajah. Shehan, welcome back. We are just, this is the third time I think you've been on the pod. We're thankful. This is the triple header.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor.
And you're a dad now, so even better. You've elevated this podcast. Now everybody on this podcast, except me, is a father, and I'm in no rush. Sorry, you guys enjoy it. I cannot be a part of the cool dads club right now, but maybe we'll get there. I have a ton of plants. That keeps me sane. And Texas Tech
football. Please just don't get a plant dad shirt. Like I don't want the dog dad.
Wait, do you want to see it?
I just you know what, like I think that is, like you said, totally valid to just want to wait. But I'm like, please let's not steal the valor of like actually having to change a blowout like I did earlier today. It's not the same. Your plants ain't doing the same for you.
Are you on that same level with like people that go around calling their pets like I'm his mom?
Yeah,
stuff like that.
Man. Yeah, my mom, God bless her. Like, so she, after we all went to college and left the house, she started to call essentially her three dogs her kids, and now she calls in relation to my daughter they're like uncle, and I'm like, I don't know about all of this. This is not for me.
It's too much down the rabbit hole, and I've made such like, it's gotten me so upset when people do that when they leave the room, or I just have an honest heart to heart with like people's pets. I will look at them and go, you are adopted. Like they stole you. You are not their biological anything. And I just let that be. And maybe they know what I'm saying. Probably not. But I said my piece. I get a lot of peace from that. And maybe they start having some kind of like, maybe they're starting to get self-aware, right? And then I don't have to deal with it because it's not my dog. But speaking of dogs, I can't really transition like that. But the Big 12 this year, well, speaking of dogs, speaking of underdogs, there it is. The Big 12. Here we are, all lovers of Big 12 football. And at the beginning of the season, the Big 12 was being pitched as this, this is the highest parity conference. Anything can happen, but we still got to do a media poll. So they kicked out the media poll. And of course, Utah coming off of stellar Pac-12 performances. Utah led it off, followed by Kansas State. Oklahoma State, no surprise there. Kansas, they have obviously a resurgence of talent there. And then Arizona, who was kind of everybody's dark horse to come in and do something special. Well, here we are, 6 weeks in. So let's catch a heartbeat on this. A quick look at the standings have tied for first is BYU, Iowa State, and Texas Tech. And tied for last are Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Kansas. Shehan, tell us a little bit about because this has been nothing short of an exciting year. And it really, you can either be excited about how good everything is going, or excited kind of an anxious way about how bad everything is going. But I don't think anybody in the Big 12 is kind of like, man, this is a boring year, right? Tell us about what's going on. Like, how are you feeling about this now as somebody who, like all of us, had expectations when this started, which are, unless you're a genius, likely flipped on their heads?
Well, it's funny. I feel pretty good about the fact that I was so high on Iowa State. They've showed me to this point what I expected. I had them actually number 2 in my preseason projections. Outside of that, I mean, it has been a true mess. I picked BYU, I think 13th in my preseason poll, maybe 14th. And I told some of the good people on Utah radio that I don't really see a pathway to them being more than a 6-6 team. Well, they're a 6-0 team right about now. So, so I think that clearly that projection has not come true. And I felt like I was a little lower on most than Oklahoma State, but certainly an 0-3 start is not what I expected coming into the year. Though, in their defense, 2 of their games were against Utah and Kansas State. And to speak on Utah for a second, like, obviously the Cameron Rising situation has made things a lot more complicated, but I felt like, in a big part of my pick for them at number 1 was I felt like they had more there back at quarterback than they did before. They brought in a transfer in Sam Heward, who started all of last year at Cal Poly, and I thought that he was going to come in and really be able to give them just a little bit more. Instead, they're turning the keys over to a true freshman in Isaac Wilson. Like, I think that the thing with this league is that we knew that there would potentially be a group that separated at the top. And right now that's been, like you mentioned, especially, the 2 undefeated teams, BYU and Iowa State, and Texas Tech has pushed themselves into that conversation with their early season play in Big 12 play. I expected the top group to be 5 or 6 teams. It's really been smaller than that to this point. And the other piece too is, even when you look at BYU and Iowa State, I mean, there have been moments where they've looked vulnerable too. So this has been top to bottom the most competitive conference in college football. It's not even close. I think that any of the teams in the bottom 3 could fight their way to the top half. Any teams at the top have a chance to fall all their way to the bottom. I mean, the reality is, like, we don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, BYU's about to hit that 6-loss slide. So
and I'd be exactly right.
He's like, I told you guys, nobody was listening to me. Joe, how do you feel about the Big 12 where things stand right now?
This is fun, right? Is this not fun football? I mean, going into every game and this being a potential bowl matchup somewhere, either Pop-Tarts Bowl or the national championship kind of game. I mean, this is one of those seasons. It's just like, it's must watch. We were off this weekend. We were just talking about it pre-pod, like how much fun this weekend was as a Tech fan on a bye week, enjoying the rest of the Big 12 conference. And I can't say that all the rest of the Power 5 schools get that kind of weekend. You do have some of those bigger matchups, but top to bottom, I mean, you can't ask for any better football play that started on Friday night and then, carried on over into Saturday and went on through. So, I mean, overall, the Big 12 conference has just been a very, very fun conference to be a part of right now for football.
Absolutely. I just think about teams that, walked into the Big 12, non-legacy teams. And I mean that even as much as like, Houston, UCF, teams that were here before the new realignment, kind of coming in thinking, well, I really don't know, like Arizona State fans. What are you supposed to think when you're like, I think we got a decent thing going? And the Big 12 media is like, you guys suck. And they basically said, well, okay, let's see what we can do with that. And, outside of a loss to Texas Tech at home or a loss to Texas Tech on the road, have surprised people. Scatabo has been one of the most electric running backs lately. He's getting a lot more national attention. And Albert and I and Joe have been talking about this, Shehan, like that it's been really cool to see the Big 12 go from very hard-nosed, back in the Southwest Conference days, you very hard-nosed running, like we're just going to, ground and pound, baby. And then it switches up in the early aughts of like, well, actually, I kind of like this air raid thing. And everybody starts switching to spread offenses, air raid. Let's air it out. And you see a lot of tremendous wide receivers, tremendous quarterbacks come through. And now we're starting to not regress, but maybe evolve once again, especially thanks to Iowa State for your dime stack defense. It's like, well, what can we do to beat this? Well, let's just get a really good running back and just run it on them. And now Big 12 teams across the board great running backs. You know, you can start at Taj Brooks. You can even, Ollie Gordon's not a bad running back, right? He's had some issues this season, but still good running backs, top to bottom. Scadabo's been in that conversation. RJ Harvey's been in that conversation. It's been exciting, right? So, John, if you had to pick one team that's like been your biggest surprise, or you know, you're looking at that, you're like, they're legit, who would it be and why?
Well, yeah. I'm gonna put BYU aside because I think that they're a little bit of an obvious answer.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you know, I do think that Arizona State to this point has been that team. Of course, like you mentioned, they play a 3-point game on the road against Texas Tech, look really good. But I think that when you look at this team, the question with them was not whether they have talent, because I think that actually, if you look at metrics like the 247 talent composite, they're actually like number 3 in the conference. But the thing is, it's all transfers. It's all guys who have maybe flamed out one place or didn't contribute in a big way last year. They actually had a number of second-year transfers, actually Cam Scadabo being one of them, who was a factor last year, but he's taken a big step forward this year. I actually think, just a quick aside, like I think that second-year transfers are one of the great inefficiencies in college football. If you can get somebody as a sophomore and keep them around, I actually think that that's a huge advantage versus trying to fill holes with seniors. But the thing that we didn't know is whether these trenches were going to come together fast enough. And last year, it was a total disaster for them. And, you know, I liked the addition of Sam Levitt at quarterback, but I didn't know if that was a game changer. But it hasn't needed to be because of how good they've been everywhere else. Their offensive line has stepped up to the challenge in so many ways, cleared a lot of holes. When you have a playmaker like Scadabo, like who by the way can do things both in the running game and in the receiving game, like I think that just makes you harder to defend. And defensively, finally, some of these big time transfers are starting to hit. You know, I look at Clayton Smith, who transferred from Oklahoma. I look at Prince Dorba, who transferred from Texas. These are all guys who were high 4-star type players and just didn't hit at their previous stops. Well, again, a lot of them as second-year guys are now starting to come together. So that was my big question is, I mean, in year one, they had a lot of these guys, and they just didn't play all that well. How much development was to be expected? Something, you know, to be candid, I was curious about is I really like Kenny Dillingham. I think that he understands. I think he gets it. But you know, there's a lot of guys who are primarily recruiters on this staff. Will the player development come along with it? And I'm really impressed. I think that they've proven themselves and proven that they're more than just a talent acquisition operation.
Yeah, absolutely. That and when you get into the depth of that, there's so much behind the scenes, like behind the metrics, behind the numbers, that you look at some teams, you're like, I don't know if this is really going to pan out. And I'm going to have a very interesting look, like kind of deep dive this offseason with the UCF guys of like, what is going on in Central Florida? But Joe, who's been your biggest surprise so far throughout this season?
Be the Kansas Jayhawks, and for obvious reasons. I mean, dark horse. You have a potential Heisman dark horse in your quarterback there, coming back off of an injury. The schedule seemed to be okay. The only crappy part about it is you don't actually have a legit home game because of the actual construction there going on in Lawrence on your actual football stadium. But for them to be in all of these games, and they've been all usually one-score games, and not being able to get the job done has been really, really odd for us to see. I mean, we thought they may have been tabbed a little too high preseason, just given some of the quarterback issues that they had. And for them to for the wheels to completely fall off of this bus, man, it's been one to watch. And, I don't know how they're going to come back from starting the season where they're at right now. So Kansas has to be the easy choice for me.
Hey, what is this, the 2000s? Get out of here, Kansas. Go back to the basement. Your thing is basketball. Get out of here.
Yeah.
For me, it's a no-brainer. It's a team that I hyped up in the summer when I visited was on the Viva the Cats podcast. I said, you guys are going to surprise a lot of people, and it was for one reason and one reason only. Cincinnati's quarterback, Brandon Sorsby, is a baller, and he was a gamer when he got in late with Illinois.
It was Indiana.
Indiana. Sorry, I'm in my head.
Yep.
With Indiana, who, by the way, they're doing pretty good this season, but gamer and like coming in dramatically changing that offense. Yeah, he had they still lost a lot of games, but like the way he gamed against good opponents, I thought this guy's he's got something special to him. Reminded me a lot of kind of a 2022 Max Duggan, just a willingness to win. He's just like, I just want to win the game. I don't care what it takes. And Texas Tech fans, very familiar because he almost won the game for Cincinnati. Like he was gonna make it happen. So the fact that they've only lost to Texas Tech on the road and Pitt at home, people are like, oh, that Pitt game, they lost by 1 point. Well, Pitt hasn't lost a game at all. So like Cincinnati's played good teams and they've won. And so this weekend they're going to be playing Arizona State. That's going to be one to watch for sure. Thank God it's 11 a.m. So I'll actually be able to watch it before we have our game. But Shehan, Joe kind of did his surprising, disappointing pick. But I want to get your thoughts on outside of Utah, who I think we can say is universally the most surprisingly disappointing team this season for the Big 12. And I'm sure they feel the same after all the mess they were talking. Who has been kind of the biggest disappointment for you this season?
Yeah, and I'll also put Kansas to the side since Joe touched on them. But, I think that Oklahoma State was a team that I mentioned I was a little lower on coming into the year than most. But it's just been everything, right? Like what I thought that we would know is that this offensive line would probably take another step with how much experience they were returning, that Ollie Gordon would give them a lot in the running game. I talked to some people who were concerned about kind of they felt like it was maybe unsustainable, some of the holes that he was able to hit early in the season last year, and maybe they wouldn't be there the same way in 2024. But this is obviously much different than I expected. But frankly, the bigger thing is what I hoped coming into the year was that yes, they got pretty lucky last year. You look at like the actual luck metrics on, that you can find advanced stat wise, and they were number 1 or 2 in the country basically everywhere. Well, I thought, okay, well, maybe the improvement with a top 10 returning production class coming back would just be enough to kind of settle them. And they'd be in that 9-win type range, even if they weren't as good as they were in 2023. Well, even outside of the running game, they've kind of been bad at everything. I mean, defensively, this is a bottom 10 national unit. They haven't gotten any better under second-year defensive coordinator Brian Nardo. In the passing game, they've been a total disaster. Quarterback Alan Bowman, of course, now benched. We'll see if Garrett Rangel has anything. He's looked terrible in the games that he's played so far this year. Like, they don't do anything well right now. And I thought that with this coaching staff, with some guys who you trust, with guys who have been around the block, like Casey Dunn running the offense, like Mike Gundy, like Charlie Dickey at offensive line coach, I just expected more. I didn't think that they'd win the Big 12, but for them to be in the cellar, it's pretty shocking.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I think for me, TCU, if we're just kind of like, okay, Kansas, Oklahoma State, TCU, I mean, and not that TCU should be a stunner, but the way that they just have lost games this season, the way that they've failed to execute. And I feel like it's one of those teams that you had Coach Dykes take over, and it was like, well, we had such a tremendous year and we're going to be able to sustain success, and let's bring in recruiting classes. And you're in freaking Fort Worth, like you're in the DFW area. You're in the hotbed. You don't have to go far at all to recruit. And not that they're not talented, but Dykes is wearing out his welcome there in Fort Worth. It's kind of crazy to see how quickly people are starting to go, this was a bad hire. And SMU people are like, thank you. So it's been interesting to see these kind of legacy teams not hold their weight, which has been really sad. But I did want to ask you how you feel about this. I've heard a lot of chatter that SEC and Big Ten are very much like the future of college football, right? That's what they want. They want to schedule each other. They want to create these premierships. They want to just like push everybody aside because they don't matter, right? The media rights, blah, blah, blah. When you look at the SEC standings and the Big Ten standings right now, you've got you got transplants up there in Texas, which has been a shocker and a disappointing. I try not to care, but at the same time, I'm like, dang, they're really good. And then Oregon, after their win over Ohio State yesterday over Will Howard, once a West Virginia Mountaineer, showing his colors.
Two Big 12 quarterbacks, Dylan Gabriel beating Will Howard too.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, and that's not unfamiliar for Will. So it's just like, dang. I was telling, my girlfriend's a Ohio State fan, and I was, we might win this. I was like, I don't know. This feels weird. Like, this feels like I feel like I've seen this before. And Will Howard went down, like looked up, and the clock was 0. I was like, there he is. Um, what is the state of football, John? What is going on? Because there is so much chirp and realignment. I just want to get your thoughts because we haven't, you're somebody that we wanted to have on when all this stuff was going around. Who's coming to the Big 12? Who's leaving? Is the ACC going to exist anymore? So many questions, so many unanswered, like anything. What is your thought on the state of college football? Because there's so many conversations happening, especially with this like now Super League that's supposed to save the whole thing, the Rudy, whatever it is. Like, what is going on, and how are you feeling about all this?
Well, just to touch on, the plan that's kind of been proposed and some of the many plans that have been proposed. The reality is, no, the SEC and Big Ten are not going to agree to anything that's going to lead to them giving up money, right? Or even empowering more people to make more money and compete with them, right? Like, this is an inefficient market. This is, consolidation, an attempt to keep as much money for a small group as possible. So that's the first thing I say about that. What I'll also say is that I actually really like the way that the Big 12 is approaching this. And the reason that I say that is because there is kind of this mood from some of the very top players in college football to say, essentially, we're moving towards what ultimately ends up being an NFL-like model where you kind of have these two big leagues and like the best teams will come play there. And you think about playoff spots and all this sort of stuff, right? And my thing is always, I grew up in Dallas. It's very much a pro sports market. If you're growing up in a market that cares about pro sports, why would you come to college sports in that case? Because the reality is, I can speak for myself, right? I went to Baylor. Like, I became a college sports fan because I went to big time college football games at the university I attended. And that's going to be the case for a lot of people. Or, certainly for people listening to this podcast, maybe you're from West Texas. Maybe one of your parents went to Texas Tech. This idea that like a Texas Tech fan would just be like, well, I guess I'll just root for Texas instead because they're the local. Like, nobody's going to do that. That's not how any of this works, right? Like, I think it's just a fundamental understanding in that way. So look, I think that there's going to be kind of the small group, and it's the same ones that it always is, right? That are competing for titles, that are consolidating in so many ways. I don't think it necessarily has to matter as much for everybody else. Like, the big thing is you want to have enough money to compete and still be playing the same sport. I think that the Big 12 and for right now the ACC have that to hang their hat on. You also, I think, most importantly, want to have some level of access to national competition. Right now, the Big 12 has essentially a guaranteed spot in the college football playoff. I think that's a good place to be. Right now, if the season ended today, they'd most likely have 2 teams in that with BYU and Iowa State. So as long as that's the case, and as long as that access is still there, I think the sport is in an okay place. Where I caution people all the time, and I caution Big Ten and SEC people about this too, is the moment that you start consolidating and saying, well, we're only going to market 15 to 25 teams. The reality is you are not just, again, there's kind of this idea of like, oh, well, Texas, Michigan put up great numbers. What if we played Texas, Michigan every single week? And it's like, well, then at a certain point, it's like, well, Texas, Michigan as a helmet game is competing with Bears, Packers as a helmet game. And is that really a battle that you're going to win? You want people to get into college football from a grassroots perspective. So ultimately, look, I'd be lying if I said that the sport is in an amazing place right now, but I do feel like we're going to slowly learn some lessons. And I'm also really excited to see what the 12-team college football playoff actually looks like when it comes together. Because, look, we just saw Alabama lose to Vanderbilt. We just saw Georgia struggle with Kentucky and Mississippi State. Like, I think that people are going to be shocked, one, how much of an advantage having a first-round bye is if you're trying to compete for a national title. And two, I think that people are not ready for how many upsets are going to happen. Now, I'm not saying that the 11 seed is going to win the national title. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. But I do think that in some years, the 11 seed will beat the 6 seed. I do think in some years the 2 seed will lose to the 7 seed. Like I think that these are things that are going to happen. And I mean, again, the stat right now is since 2021, Ryan Day is 1-7 against top 5 opponents. Guess what? He's going to have to play multiple top 5 opponents to make it to the national title game. I think that people are really underselling how hard that's going to be and what kind of chaos that could create.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's, this dance we're trying to play right now, because when we think about playoffs kind of at the collegiate level, everybody goes right towards March Madness. And there is a beautiful, and I love it, grassroots reason why people love March Madness so much is because, like, you for most of you poverty programs that don't play in the Big 12, your conference is kind of like, hey, we got a really good guy, whatever. But there's this moment where you have, like, you're really playing well in the ACC, and then you go play who knows what from whatever small, G5, and then they whip you on national TV, and it's like, oh my God. And you've just validated the life of all 60,000 people that live in that town. And it's so exciting, and it's what makes college like sports so beautiful, is that it's a lot more regionalized. It's a lot more, hey, we're in this area, we grew up in this area, like you said, maybe my parents went there, alumni, I'm alumni, legacies, whatever. That's what makes it super exciting. Now, we should never do a 64 team football playoff, I'll tell you that much, for the sake of injury. Please, God, no. But there is something to be said about this expanded playoff. I like it. The 14 playoff for me was exciting because it meant, like, changing into this mindset, like moving into something new was great, but it did exclude a lot of people. And I think a lot of people felt that. And it was, now to the 12, it's like, well, hold on now. Now we've got a lot more excitement, a lot more opportunity for teams like, a Texas Tech, who's probably not going to win the Big 12, but by playing well and, like, by winning, a significant amount of games, might squeak their way in, right? There's an opportunity for every team. It's not about, and Joe and I will talk about this after we get off here, this is not about where you're sitting in the AP poll, right? Are you there? Do people believe you're good? It's like, well, the record is going to, come November, they're going to have the playoff poll, and it's like, okay, well, now where's it really stack up? And that's what, for me, is most exciting about kind of this era of college football. And yeah, there's a lot of scary stuff that comes with that. And it's mostly just, you're right, kind of money grabbing. People are like, if we can replicate this, if we can replicate Red River Rivalry every weekend, we should. And it's like, yeah, you guys, it was the whole Jurassic Park thing. You guys never stopped to ask if you should do it. You were just so excited you wanted to do it, and you ruined everything.
And one thing that I want to emphasize to people too is I think that the most valuable thing that college football can do right now, and I think that if it's handled correctly, which, we'll see whether that happens, but I think that creating multiple pathways for success at different levels is the most important thing that really did not exist in the 14 college football playoff. Like, nobody complimented Michigan State for making the playoff, right? Like, they did it in 2015. Nobody really was like, that's amazing. Like, that's great. That's a special season. I think that that's going to be a little different in this system. And what I mean by that is, for some teams, making the college football playoff will be a huge success. For other teams, winning a college football playoff game will be a huge success. For others, it'll be like making Final Fours. It'll be winning national championships. And that's fine and dandy, right? But I think that we're going to be able to enjoy the idea of the journey just a little bit more. And also, I mean, one thing that I love about it too is that this system, and I will say, I love 12. We're probably not staying at 12. I don't love that. I wish that we'd stay at 12. I think that's a really good number and a really good system. But this system dramatically incentivizes conference championships. And we have moved so far away from the idea of winning your conference being awesome. Like, actually, it's funny, right? Like I mentioned, I graduated from Baylor. I was there from 12 to 16. It was a good time to be there. Also a good time to get out. That's beside the point. But, I was there in 2013 when Baylor won their first Big 12 title in, well, I guess ever, right? And then I was there in 2014 when they won back-to-back Big 12 titles, which is an insane thing for Baylor University to do. But all anybody could think about is, well, we got left out of the playoff. And, now you sit here 10 years later and you're like, I guess that was like a really important, cool thing that happened. And like, again, the celebration between the 2013 team and the 2014 team was so different because the thought and narrative was so much about being excluded. Well, I think that having a direct benefit to winning your conference is only going to double down the idea of, hey, you know what, that's something to be celebrated. And again, like maybe whoever wins the Big 12 this year gets blown out in their first game. I don't know, we'll see. But I think that at the same time, like, that's going to matter, that when you win your conference, you are guaranteed a spot to the college football playoff.
I love that. I didn't even think about that with the Baylor perspective. I mean, there's a lot of teams who are feeling that now, just like, we just got to win. We just got to win the conference. And I love that. It does validate conference play. There have been times, obviously, especially late in the BCS, it's like, well, we're kind of just taking our foot off the gas because we already got in, and people were like really pissed off about that, which understandably. But we're kind of at time here, so before we get you on your way, do dad things. Say some good things about the Texas Tech Red Raiders, or say some bad things. Tell people where your thoughts are with this Texas Tech team, who is hopefully surprising some. Not the voters, not yet, but hopefully some.
Well, first of all, I'd say put Taj Brooks in bubble wrap, man, because apparently this team is just so different when he's healthy and active. But seriously, like, I said this coming into the year. I think that people kind of felt like year 2 for Joe McGuire was a little bit of a disappointing year. Texas Tech won back-to-back winning Big 12 records for the first time since Mike Leach. So, like, I think to have a quote-unquote down year and win the way that they're doing is already in itself validation. Now you add on top of that, of course, the 3-0 start this year, and what happened in non-conference play happened, but to kind of step back up and be back up for the challenge, I think that's huge. And look, I mean, obviously, like, I think that it's still very early, but to be in this position early, to already be up 3-0, I think is huge. I love offensively, kind of the diversification that they've had the past few weeks. And look, I mean, obviously it's been a slow start defensively, but they've been timely. They've made plays when they've needed to. And I mean, I'll tell you what, Jacob Rodriguez is one of my favorite players to watch right now on the defensive side in the Big 12. I think that he deserves a lot more attention and credit than he's got to this point. So the pieces are coming together. And again, the most exciting thing about starting 3-0 is that I don't think that we've really seen Texas Tech's Texas football yet.
Bubble wrap, and God, hopefully this bye week's got some of our defensive backs back, because we have been playing with like echoes of a defense. And all credit to Tim DeRuyter, who has done a masterclass job with a pretty beat up unit. But Shehan, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast. Always glad to have you here. One of the best voices, one of the best personalities, one of the most level-headed people who talk about this sport. Can't tell you how honored we are to be on here. So if you want, plug anything you got going on. I know you're a busy man, so if you have anything you want our people to know about, let's hear it.
Yeah, you can find all my work on cbssports.com. You can follow me on basically every single social media platform at Shehan Jeyarajah. Twitter's obviously the one that I use most. And you can listen to my podcast also, the College Football Survivor Show.
Awesome. CBS, a small network out there somewhere in the Midwest.
Yeah, a little rinky-dink startup.
And of course, if you didn't need a reason to love Shehan anymore, it calls it Twitter, not X. So an OG who won't give up the way. I love it. This is the way. So Shehan, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll see you again sometime.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have to leave, Shehan. Get out of here. We're gonna keep rolling. Get the hell out of here. He's like, all right, just sits there.
Yeah.
I should have just kept going.
You could have paused.
I can put him in the back rooms. I forget about that. I could have yeeted him off. I'm so dumb. We're figuring this thing out, people. We're figuring this whole StreamYard thing out.
Our apologies, Shehan, right?
Our apologies, Shehan. just talking immediate shit as soon as he gets that guy. No. One of the best. Super thankful every time he comes on. Always has cool insight, and he's one of those guys who always has like something in his back pocket just to bring up, like, maybe think of this, and just like the college football lore. I'm like,
right,
this is great. I love that.
Good stuff. Great stuff, matter of fact.
Well, Joe, the AP poll came out today, and I kind of alluded to it, and it has been a topic of conversation. Now, I know you and I are the same mindset, and Albert is too. Win and we're in. Like, we love that. But it's been a significant conversation with Texas Tech fans who now at this point, when you're sitting 5-1 and you've beaten, well, and let's talk about, like, Abilene Christian, North Texas, as your non-con, and then you had in conference, we've gotten both Arizona schools and Cincinnati. Now, with a 5-1 record, with those opponents, knowing what you know about them, how do you let's put ourselves in the mindset of somebody who's kind of upset with this. Does Texas Tech deserve to be ranked sitting 5-1 with the performances that they've had this season?
I don't necessarily think they deserve it. That they haven't. I mean, yeah, they're winning games, right? But they're not pretty. So does that take into effect, how we put you in the AP poll? I don't honestly think it's a bad thing that they're not ranked right now. I mean, the thing that bothers me is that Arizona State got more than us in as far as the votes go in this latest poll itself. Whenever we beat them here, and that is what it is. But if we're both unranked, but we have more AP votes than Arizona State, then you take that, right? None of their games have been blowout victories in the Big 12 either. They've all been nail biters. Kansas was a nail biter. Ours was a nail biter. And then their most recent one against Utah was a nail biter, So, I mean, I don't know how you I don't know, other than just the opponent that they beat in that spread was a higher opponent than we've beat total. Utah was top 15, top 16. So it's just like, oh, you beat them. You probably deserve a little bit more credit than the team that's already beat you, or the only team that's beat you, So I'm not mad at it, but one week at a time. That's all we could do right now is take care of business.
Yeah, 1 week at a time. My curiosity is kind of like you, where there's obviously a media bias. Everybody wants to watch. I think most media pollsters want to watch the obvious ones, right? They want to watch the big games. They don't want to kind of put in the work and really dig into the other games. And I think that there's a little bit of disservice to the craft of being a good sports media journalist whenever you just go, well, Arizona State beats 16 Utah 27-19. That's pretty good. Unranked versus ranked, got to give them more votes. And ignoring the fact that Utah, without Cam Rising, was pretty suspect. And now Utah with Cam Rising is pretty fraudulent.
Yeah.
And Utah just isn't the team that people wanted them to be, or that they thought they would be, that we all thought they might be, right? It was like their fans were annoying, but they had a good team, and it just hasn't panned out. So I'm like you. I'm a bit frustrated with Arizona State getting more votes, but I do think it's more so along the lines of like they beat a ranked team, and we just haven't had a ranked team, and we probably won't have a ranked team until we go into Iowa, to go into Ames. And I bet Iowa State's still probably ninth, if not a little bit higher, maybe seventh by the time we get there, because they're legit. But it's going to be a heck of a conversation. They're going to have to tell their kids about the time that they let Texas Tech get to 7-1, 8-1 if they beat. Could you imagine?
Yeah.
8-1, you just beat a top 10 Iowa State team. I don't care if it's by 1 point or 50 points, but you beat Iowa State in Ames in November, top 10, and you were unranked, 7-1 unranked. Journalists are going to have a freaking fit because they're going to be like, well, I wanted to vote them, but there were so many good teams ahead.
Right.
Get out of here. Get the hell out of here.
Do you think some of that is a part of the feel good story? Like if Arizona State was preseason number 6 and they were doing this, it's not a big deal. But since they were preseason dead last or bottom 3, and they're 5-1 right now, just coming off beating a top 15 ranked football team, that reads better as a story as opposed to the way Tech's gone around their 5-1.
That very well could be. I mean, because when you see criticism on Twitter for like people, I saw an Iowa State fan coming at like a Tech fan or Red Raider Ty. He was like, Texas Tech barely beat Abilene Christian and got smacked by Washington State. Like they're garbage. Like they're blah, blah, blah. And very weak take, very base take, like just very lazy, right? Because it's like, okay, Abilene Christian, actually pretty good and made up of ex-Tech football players, so not your average FCS team. Washington State, a good football team, who lost to Boise State, who has a Heisman front runner as a running back. Like, you know, these aren't like the games you think they are. It's not like, oh, Wazoo's garbage. It's like, no, they're pretty good, and we didn't have a running back, so dramatically change, and we get our running back, and guess what? 4-game win streak, one on the road. But I do wonder. That's a good point. If media looks at kind of that preseason media poll, and they think, oh, Arizona State is way outperforming, they have got to be the real deal, versus like Texas Tech, middle of the pack. Yeah, they're winning, but they'll probably start losing here soon. I could see that. I could see that.
And that's no disrespect to Arizona State, because they're one of my favorite teams to follow in the new Big 12, to be completely honest. Dillingham's a really good coach. Did you see his on-field deal after the win against Utah, his interview?
I didn't actually watch it, but I saw a lot of tweets about it. Give us a synopsis.
Yeah, I mean, just you could see this. I mean, it's like almost so happy he wanted to cry, right? Youngest coach in FBS at 34 years of age, and he's doing this at his alma mater, and he just wants to make them relevant. 3-9, and now you're 5-1, and now you're getting some semblance of respect back to that program. I mean, it's a feel-good story. It's a really good story. Dillingham's a really good coach. Scatterbo is by far one of those guys. I think he's right behind Taj, and Giddings is top 3 back in the Big 12 right now. I mean, there's just you can't dispute that. In my eyes, you can't. And he's also a feel-good story. He wasn't recruited out of high school. He went to San Jose State, and then he came over. And so it's just like, these are those guys that you want to cheer for. And that's why I brought up the whole, bottom 3 of the Big 12, and now they're at 5-1, making waves, so to speak.
It reminds me of 2013 Texas Tech Red Raiders, led by young phenom head coach, alma mater, wanted to do his team proud. Started off 7-0, baby. 7-0, ranked 16th in the nation. And then they walked into Norman, Oklahoma, took a pretty hard L. 38-30 was that wasn't that bad. But it was the following week against number 18 Oklahoma State, where he lost 52-34, that the wheels kind of fell off there. But in the same instance, like Texas Tech switching head coaches after a ridiculous story of a head coach leaving, right? And you have an alma mater come back, and he's like, hey, A&M, that was a business decision. F y'all, we're going to go out and do this thing. And he comes in and seemingly does the thing. Had a huge win over number 24 TCU early on. Kansas, and then Iowa State victory, the West Virginia victory, 7-0, 16th in the nation. It was like everything was coming around. And so my curiosity is actually very much something I've wondered, is that our media kind of tired of Texas Tech not having sustainable success? Because it feels like, in the case of Iowa State, like their season hasn't been knockout, drag out special, in my opinion. But like, this is a team that they have consistent success. They are consistently in this conversation of they could win the Big 12, right? They beat Iowa by 1 point this season, right? The Iowa State, the Cyhawk game, like that's the freaking flagship game for the state of Iowa. And they usually win it, right? They won it by 1 point this year. Iowa ranked at the time. And people are like, hey, Iowa State, pretty good, pretty good. Then they play Arkansas State 52-7, right? Who the hell is that? They play Houston. They blank them 20-0, which is like, at the time, I'm not surprised that Houston didn't get any points.
Right.
I'm more surprised, actually, and looking at some of the defensive statistics. We talked about this because we saw that Texas Tech was like, in the Big 12, like conference play, it was like, you're doing really well. And I wanted to talk about it. But above us was Houston, because Houston actually hadn't given up a lot of points. They just can't score to save their life.
Yeah.
So it was like, what the hell's going on? But they blank Houston. They beat Baylor 43-21, which is less impressive every week. And then they beat West Virginia just recently, which that was a good win. The Cole Rush game was a good win for Iowa State. But the resume, it's not stacked with top 25 teams. They're undefeated, yeah, but it's not like these, like the Arkansas State game. If you drop 100 points on a FCS team, I could care less, right? That's what you're supposed to do, whatever. But when you look at Iowa State, they have sustained success. They're always in the conversation of like, could they get to the Big 12 championship this year? Texas Tech has never been in that conversation. It has never been like a legitimate. The moment it happens, like in 2013, is like 7-0. Texas Tech's a different beast. And then they lost the last 5 games. Right. People were starting to talk about Texas Tech. I actually remember seeing an ESPN on the front page. It was like, I can't remember what it said, but I remember a picture of like Texas Tech. The band was super stoked, whatever. And since then, it was like lost. I'm actually curious, at a very biological level, are journalists just afraid of Texas Tech? Because you think about College Game Day, will never mark the clip that our tech guys put out, tech media team put out, where it was like Marshawn Lynch is like, that's ugly. I was going to pick Texas Tech. He's the anomaly because he's not a journalist. He's looking at the squad going, no, they're pretty good. Like, I think they'll win today. And everybody else is like, you don't know Texas Tech.
I know. Even Saban, right?
Even Saban. Come on, man. He was like, yeah, that team sucks. I'm like, well, I can't say anything to you, sir. But damn it.
Yeah. I go back and think, if we didn't drop Washington State, right? If we're 6-0 right now, and I mean, hell, we're 3-0 in conference right now. We're not even being mentioned in any kind of
no capacity,
but potential, being like a legit contender. This is all like a big dream. It's a fluke, where there's nothing concrete with this Texas Tech team that gives anybody reason to believe that come December 7th, the Red Raiders will be running out of a tunnel at AT&T Stadium in Dallas, so.
Well, and I don't know if you noticed, but when Shehan was on, he was talking about the top 2 teams in the Big 12, right. BYU, Iowa State, Texas Tech. But he said all 3, but he said top 2. I feel like that's just the mentality. It's like,
right,
Texas Tech's good. They're doing well. It's not sustainable. And it's kind of like when I picked us to lose against Arizona, I thought legitimately we have the talent to beat Arizona, but we have not won on the road. So like, I need to be proven otherwise. I think the media just needs to be proven otherwise, because until Texas Tech rattles off a 3rd place finish in the Big 12, a 2nd place finish, a Big 12 championship, I feel like there's going to be a very lazy approach to this team, saying, well, I kind of get it. Bad defense, high octane offense. I know what's going to happen, right? They're going to get shootouts and then they'll lose because their defense is trash and the other defense is just mildly better, whatever. It's Big 12 football. But the reality is that Texas Tech is playing some of its best defense it has in the past 10 years. And with a depleted defensive roster, people are not going to appreciate this season enough with the job that Tim DeRuyter has done with the players that he's had, right? And some players are absolutely like a linchpin for this. Like Braden Lux is a huge linchpin for this defense of like, it's like, are they going to have a good offensive game or not? And boy, howdy, I hope we have them against Colorado after they put damn near 400 yards up on Kansas State.
Right.
But there's like, we need to prove them differently. So I think that if it's kind of nice not being ranked, for me, it's like, hey, go out there and prove them otherwise, right? And I think that's where the mentality of this team is right now. What about you?
Yeah, 100%. I feel the same way. And I really have enjoyed the Texas Tech football media team, putting things out. It's not, 5-1 or 3-0. It's, it's the team they just beat and it's 1-0. So it's game by game by game. There's not looking ahead. They're not looking, like right now, I think, as what we do is we report with what's going on with Texas Tech. It's easy for us to jump to a Iowa State game because, this is probably the next big game that this team's going to actually have to get that respect, from, everybody. So
Yep.
nobody's going to take a blowout win over Baylor. Like, oh, Texas Tech is, really did something. No, you just kicked another team while they were down. Oh,
Yeah.
you win and won in Fort Worth, where 80% of the fans were Texas Tech fans. So a glorified home game that's just away from Lubbock. They're not going to take that as into consideration either. You're not going to get respect until after Ames. Either you go up to Ames and win, or you go up to Ames and give them a dogfight, and it's like a 1 point or 3 point, whatever the case may be, like a moral victory kind of deal. So where this team stands right now is just, a week by week basis. We are getting healthier on the back end. We've seen the numbers, what it is for guys like a Braylon Lux when he's on the field, what kind of points per game this defense is allowing with and without him. And that number is staggering. It's like 12 or 13 points difference with him on the field and off the field. So, keeping guys like him healthy, all the youth that has actually been able to play this year up until this point, how much is that going to factor in on the back end on how the last 6 games go for this football team? And I think all the pieces are starting to line up for this team. This bye week couldn't have come at a better time for us, especially, just some minor lingering injuries with some defensive players. You get them an extra week of rest, and then now you're back to work, and then welcoming in a Baylor football team who's really struggling. And now you could start, you become bowl eligible, a win this Saturday. 7 weeks in, who thought we were going to actually be bowl eligible at this point? That was kind of a push early on, especially how we were playing. We're like, we may need all 12 games to get bowl eligible here. But now, we're 1 win away from being at that point in the season. So I think this team is on the right path. I think the way Coach McGuire and staff, including DeRuiter, have made all the adjustments needed and that are necessary to, make this very interesting on the back end. But I think you just need to take it one game at a time, be consistent, and, maybe somebody will start watching.
Maybe. Greatest thing about this season is that Joe's seemingly ridiculous prediction that we could be 10-2 is still very much in play. And they laughed at him. They laughed at him, and he was right. And by they, I mean Albert and I. But we're cynical. We've always been cynical. Joe brings our optimism average up to like glass 1/100th of a full. So, outside of that, I mean, we're just talking big. We're just talking big. This is bye week. We're just talking Big 12. We will preview Baylor later this week. Hopefully, Albert's feeling better. Talk about a Baylor team that is fighting for their life. We'll talk about Dave Aranda, who was fighting for his job. Those kind of games, those kind of people are dangerous. So cannot rest, cannot let off the gas if you're Texas Tech. You got to treat Baylor like they're coming in as a top 5. Otherwise, they'll sneak one past you, and that's the last thing you want after a bye week. So that's all for Texas Tech football. Texas Tech soccer, quick check-in, 11-2-2. This is one of the best soccer teams. And this is the hard thing about, and I'm going to keep this as short as possible. I'll do like some kind of mini soda on this or something. This team, you got to start marking off your calendar for the playoffs, like the NCAA playoffs, because this team is going the distance. I will say the quickest note about this, that Tom Stone did a tremendous job looking at kind of the inefficiencies of the past playoff teams that he's had that have been great teams, but that have gotten caught off guard later in the, like against Princeton. We had one against, who was that last one against? We've played good teams that were built differently, and we suffered. And he basically did this thing where he's like, what was bad about that game? All right, let's fix that. And basically built a whole unit from the back forward. Built strong defense, got great midfielders, and found strikers who knew how to finish in the box. And it's paid off, man. We haven't lost a game since like mid-August, right? A couple draws 2 draws in conference, but you've been tearing it up otherwise. Colorado should have been a win. Stupid officiating. But you're tearing it up right now. The women's soccer team is the premier program at Texas Tech right now. They are going to get the closest to a national championship in the fall. In the spring, it may be basketball. But we'll talk about that later. Joe, anything else you want to tell the people before we hop off?
Were you thinking about North Carolina, the soccer team?
I'm never thinking about that state.
No, I know, but that was the team that kind of gave this team.
That was right.
And then it's women's softball as well. Can't leave those ladies out for the chance at a natty this year too. I mean, let's be real.
Oh, in the spring, yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sorry. We'll talk plenty about that. Come springtime, we'll talk a little bit about baseball. We're going to talk a lot about Texas Tech softball because it's one of the most expensive programs on campus right now for one reason and one reason only. But stay tuned for the spring to learn about that.
I got them season tickets on lock though, so we're gonna have to.
Yeah,
I got that while the ticket was a hot commodity, so we're good there. But
there you go.
But as far as anything else, another week, Baylor week. Baylor's coming in just like you said. They're also coming in off of a bye week, so Coach Aranda's coaching for his job at this point in time. So he's already looking over his shoulder, and if this team doesn't perform well, who knows if this change will happen in season or right after season. So a lot of stuff to clean up on our side of the ball, but it seems like we're probably going to be as close to as healthy as we've been since the start of the year, to a degree. And hey, 6 games in, and guess what, Jeremy? We still have a healthy quarterback. It's so great.
All right, when Barron goes down against Baylor, you will all remember this moment. I'll actually clip it. This is where the moment that Texas Tech fell apart because of Joe.
Because you're making it sound like Cameron Brown's our go-to guy whenever it's Will Hammond. If it was Cam Brown, the only guy back there, and Jake Strong, I think you have a point. But
Joe's saying he doesn't give a rip if Barron goes down. We got back up on lock. Okay,
we do.
Before we talk ourselves into a grave, we had Shehan Jeyarajah of CBS Sports, a little known television network. Joe is always, Albert's off in the ether, throwing up somewhere in a weird bathroom. And this has been the People's Champ, presented by 1012 Network. Stay wrecked, people. Boop. Oh, I gotta press end recording.